Pregnant woman inherits a cabin condemned for 67 years. But upon opening the door, Sarah Mitchell held the phone with trembling hands as the lawyer repeated the information for the third time. At 8 months pregnant, she never imagined she would receive an inheritance from a great-grandmother she had never met. The news came at a delicate time in her life, when she and her husband Marcus were facing financial difficulties preparing for the baby's arrival. The lawyer explained that Mrs. Grace, her paternal great-grandmother, had left a rural property in the interior of Vermont. According to the documents, the cabin had been condemned for 67 years for reasons the man couldn't fully clarify. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest when he mentioned that condemnation signs surrounded the place and that the family had never returned there. "But why did she leave me this property if we never met?" asked Sarah, stroking her prominent belly. "According to the will, Mrs. Mitchell, your great-grandmother always followed the family from a distance. She left specific instructions for the inheritance to be delivered only when someone from the female lineage was expecting a child," replied the lawyer in a respectful tone. Marcus, who was listening to the conversation from the other side of their small rented apartment's kitchen, shook his head negatively. He was worried about overdue bills and the approaching due date, and the idea of getting involved with complicated inheritance matters did not appeal to him. "Sarah, you're at the end of your pregnancy. This is no time to go chasing after abandoned property," said Marcus, crossing his arms. "Especially one that's been condemned for so long. It must have serious problems." Sarah hung up the phone and was silent for a few minutes. Something inside her, an inexplicable curiosity, pulled her heart toward that unknown cabin. It was as if an ancestral voice whispered in her mind, calling her to discover secrets buried by time. "Marcus, what if this property is the solution to our problems?" she said, trying to convince him. "We can at least take a look. The lawyer said it's 2 hours from here." "Honey, you can barely climb the building stairs without getting winded. How do you want to travel to the countryside to see a cabin that's probably falling apart?" Marcus sighed, showing his frustration. "What if something happens to you or the baby out there in the middle of nowhere?" Sarah knew Marcus had valid reasons to worry, but an inexplicable force drove her. During the pregnancy, she had dreamed several times of a white-haired woman reaching out to her in a place surrounded by golden vegetation. Now those dreams made more sense. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, imagining what her great-grandmother was like and why the property had been condemned for so long. By morning, her determination was even stronger. She decided that with or without Marcus's approval, she needed to see that place. "I'll go with you," said Marcus during breakfast, seeing the resolve in his wife's eyes. "But only for a quick look, and we come back the same day, do you promise?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The trip to the property was quiet, punctuated only by the GPS directions and the constant movements of the baby in Sarah's womb. As they moved away from the state capital, the landscape transformed into golden fields and mountains covered by dense forest. The air became purer, but also carried a melancholy that Sarah couldn't explain. When they finally arrived at the indicated address, both were shocked by what they found. The entrance to the property was blocked by a rusty barbed wire fence and faded signs that read, "Property condemned, no trespassing." Some newer signs had been placed over the old ones, suggesting someone periodically reinforced the prohibition. "Look at the state of this," murmured Marcus, examining the deteriorated fence. "Who could be putting up these new signs?" Sarah got out of the car with difficulty, leaning on the door, her eyes fixed on the large, centuries-old tree that rose majestically in the center of the property. Beneath its shade, a wooden cabin resisted the passage of time, with its roof partially collapsed and walls darkened by moisture and years of abandonment. "Marcus, look at that tree," said Sarah, pointing to the imposing canopy. "It's exactly like the one in my dream." Marcus followed his wife's gaze and had to admit there was something impressive about the landscape. The tree, despite its years, remained strong and leafy, as if it were the silent guardian of that forgotten place. Thick branches stretched in all directions, creating a natural canopy over the abandoned cabin. "Well, we've seen it. Now we can go back," said Marcus, clearly uncomfortable. "This place gives me the creeps. It's like someone just disappeared from here and never came back." Sarah, however, couldn't take her eyes off the property. Something was calling to her, a sense of familiarity she couldn't understand. Her steps automatically led her toward the fence, even with Marcus protesting behind her. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Marcus followed her, worried. "Those signs aren't there for no reason. It could be dangerous." "I just want to get closer," she replied, finding an opening in the fence where the wires had come loose over time. "Look, you can get through here." Marcus sighed heavily, but he knew it would be useless to try to stop her once Sarah made up her mind. He helped her cross the fence carefully, holding her hand as she passed through the opening. The ground on the other side was covered with dry grass and small shrubs spreading between the fence and the cabin. As they approached the structure, interesting details revealed themselves. The cabin, despite being abandoned, had a solid structure. The windows were intact, just covered by a thick layer of dust. The front door, made of solid wood, still hung firmly on its hinges, though the paint had peeled off almost completely. "Look at this," said Sarah, pointing to a small garden that still showed traces of organization. "Someone planted herbs here. Some are still growing." Marcus observed the plants stubbornly sprouting among the weeds. He recognized basil, mint, and other herbs that seemed to renew themselves naturally, as if the soil still held the memory of the care it received decades ago. "It's strange," admitted Marcus. "For a property abandoned for so long, a lot is still preserved." Sarah reached the cabin door and on impulse turned the rusty doorknob. To her surprise, the door opened with a deep creak, revealing the interior of the structure. A gust of dusty air escaped, carrying a sweet, nostalgic scent that vaguely reminded Sarah of her maternal grandmother's house. "Sarah, don't go in there," warned Marcus, holding her arm. "There could be structural problems, dangerous animals, anything." But Sarah had already taken the first step inside the cabin, and what she saw left her completely speechless. The interior was preserved in a way that defied all logic. A wooden table occupied the center of the kitchen, with chairs arranged around it, as if someone were about to sit down for dinner at any moment. Porcelain dishes were arranged on an old shelf, and kitchen utensils hung neatly near the wood-burning stove. "How is this possible?" murmured Sarah, gently touching the surface of the table. "Everything is up intact." Marcus entered behind her, equally impressed. It was as if time had stopped inside, preserving every object exactly as it had been left decades ago. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but there were no signs of serious deterioration, significant leaks or damage caused by animals. "Someone is taking care of this place," concluded Marcus, examining the windows. "There's no way it could be so naturally preserved." Sarah walked slowly through the rooms of the cabin. There was a small living room with a sofa and armchair covered by old blankets, a bedroom with an iron bed and a hand-embroidered quilt, and a pantry that still held jars of homemade preserves. Each space breathed simplicity and coziness, as if awaiting the return of its inhabitants. It was in the kitchen, on the central table, that Sarah made the discovery that would completely change her life. A yellowed envelope was carefully positioned in the center of the table, with her name written by hand in elegant, old-fashioned script, "For Sarah Mitchell, when the right time came." "Marcus, come see this," called Sarah, her voice choked with emotion. "How is it possible that my name is on this envelope?" Marcus approached and examined the writing. The ink was faded, but still legible. The envelope paper had the texture and yellowed color characteristic of decades of age. It was sealed with red wax that bore the impression of a delicate flower. "This doesn't make any sense," said Marcus, shaking his head. "You said you never met your great-grandmother. How could she know you would be named Sarah?" Sarah picked up the envelope with trembling hands. The baby moved intensely in her womb, as if also feeling the importance of that moment. She carefully broke the wax seal and withdrew several sheets of paper written in the same elegant script as the envelope. "My dear great-granddaughter Sarah," the letter began, "if you are reading this letter, it means the moment I have waited for so many years has finally arrived. I know you must be confused and full of questions, but I ask for your patience as I tell a story our family has hidden for a long time." Sarah's hands trembled as she continued reading. The letter revealed that her great-grandmother, Mrs. Grace, had been forced to leave the cabin in 1957 when she was pregnant with her great-grandfather. The family had rejected her because the child's father was of humble origin, a farm worker they considered unsuitable for a young woman of her social standing. "Marcus, listen to this," said Sarah, with tears in her eyes. "They wanted me to give my son up for adoption and marry someone of better standing. When I refused, they threw me out of the house and spread word that I had dishonored the family. I came to this cabin, which belonged to a distant aunt, and here I raised my boy alone." Marcus sat down heavily in one of the chairs at the table, processing the information. The story explained many things that had always seemed strange in Sarah's family. Her paternal grandfather had always been vague about his origins and never spoke about his own mother. "Keep reading," said Marcus, visibly moved by the revelation. Sarah turned the page and continued. "For years, I worked as a seamstress and embroiderer to support my son. This cabin became not only our home, but a refuge for other women in similar situations. I helped many young women rejected by their families, offering shelter during pregnancy and support after birth." The letter went on to explain that Mrs. Grace had discovered, through acquaintances in town, that her son grew up believing she had abandoned him. The family had told him that his mother was troubled and had left without a trace. The boy never knew she fought to keep him until she was forced to give him to relatives. "That's why my grandfather never spoke about her," murmured Sarah, the puzzle pieces clicking into place in her mind. "He thought he had been abandoned." The letter continued with moving details about how Mrs. Grace followed her son's life from a distance. She found out when he got married, when he had children, and followed the birth and growth of her grandchildren, including Sarah's father. She always dreamed of reconciling with the family, but feared her presence would bring more suffering. "When I learned you were about to be born," the letter continued, "I felt God was giving me a new opportunity. I left instructions for this property to be transferred to you when the time came that you were carrying a new life. I wanted you to know the truth about our history and decide for yourself if it's worth preserving the memory of those who came before." Sarah had to stop reading for a few minutes, too emotional to continue. The baby moved constantly, as if also reacting to the emotional intensity of the moment. Marcus stood up and hugged his wife, offering the comfort she needed. "There's more," said Sarah, wiping away her tears and resuming reading. "This cabin holds many precious memories, but also secrets that may bring difficulties. Our family never forgave me for dishonoring their name. Some relatives are still alive and may try to stop you from claiming what is rightfully yours." The letter warned Sarah about the possibility of family resistance and explained that the property's restriction was not official, but rather a maneuver by some relatives to keep the place inaccessible. Mrs. Grace had legally left the property to Sarah through a will registered with a notary, but knew there would be conflicts. "She knew this would happen," said Marcus, impressed by his great-grandmother's foresight. "That's why she left everything prepared for you." The last part of the letter contained specific instructions on where to find important documents hidden on the property, including photographs, certificates, and other papers that would prove the story's truth. Mrs. Grace also mentioned she had left some resources set aside to help Sarah maintain the property, should she decide to keep it. "If you choose to preserve this place," the letter ended, "know that you will be honoring not only my memory, but that of all the women who found refuge here when the world turned its back on them. If you decide it's too complicated, I will understand. What matters is that you know your history and can make your own choices." The letter was signed simply as, "Your great-grandmother who always loved you, Grace." Sarah carefully folded the pages and looked around the cabin with new eyes. Now she understood why she felt so connected to that place. It was as if the walls held not only the memory of her great-grandmother, but of all the women who had found shelter there. "What do you want to do?" asked Marcus, observing the determined expression on his wife's face. "I want to find those photographs she mentions," replied Sarah. "I need to see them with my own eyes. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, Please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. According to the letter's instructions, the photographs were hidden in a box behind a loose board in the pantry. Marcus examined the indicated wall and found a board that moved easily, revealing a small secret compartment. From inside, he retrieved a well-preserved metal box that held dozens of old photographs. The first photos showed Mrs. Grace as a young woman, a beautiful woman with delicate features and determined eyes. There were photos of her pregnant, posing proudly beside the cabin, with her hands on her prominent belly. Sarah was struck by their physical resemblance, especially in the way they held their bellies during pregnancy. "Look at this one," said Sarah, showing a photo to Marcus. "It's almost as if it were me, just in black and white." Other photographs showed Mrs. Grace caring for her son as a baby, then as a boy, always in the setting of the cabin. There were images of her working at an old sewing machine, hanging clothes on the line, tending the vegetable garden Sarah had noticed outside. Even more striking were the photos showing other women on the property. Young pregnant women posing shyly beside Mrs. Grace, mothers with newborn babies, children playing under the large tree. It was evident that this place had been a refuge for many families over the years. "How many stories this place must have seen," murmured Marcus, examining the photographs with growing respect. Among the photos, Sarah found birth certificates for several children born on the property, always with Mrs. Grace listed as a witness. There were also receipts for sewing services, thank you letters from women who had been helped, and even some drawings made by children who had passed through the cabin. One special document caught Sarah's attention, a birth certificate for her grandfather, issued when he was already an adult. It seemed Mrs. Grace had managed to register him officially only years after his birth, probably when she had the means to hire a lawyer. "Marcus, this proves she didn't abandon my grandfather," said Sarah. Moved, she fought to give him a legal identity. As they examined the documents, they heard footsteps outside the cabin. Marcus stood up immediately, placing himself between Sarah and the door. An elderly man appeared on the threshold, watching them with curiosity but without hostility. "You must be the new owners," said the man, removing a worn hat from his head. "I'm Henry Thompson. I've lived on the neighboring property for over 40 years. Marcus relaxed slightly but remained alert. Sarah, curious, approached the elderly man who seemed to have stories to tell. "Did you know my great-grandmother, Mrs. Grace?" asked Sarah directly. Mr. Henry's face lit up with a nostalgic smile. "Yes, I did, young lady. Mrs. Grace was a saint. She helped my own family when I was a child. My mother was widowed very young, and Mrs. Grace taught her to sew to support her children." Mr. Henry said he had always known the property was legally preserved, but that some members of the original family spread that it was condemned to discourage visitors. He himself put up the new signs periodically, following instructions left by Mrs. Grace, but he knew that one day the true heirs would arrive. "Why didn't you look for us before?" asked Marcus. "Because Mrs. Grace made me promise to wait until someone from the family came of their own accord," explained Mr. Henry. "She said the truth only has value when a person is ready to receive it." The elderly man revealed he had discreetly cared for the property for decades, making small repairs, controlling the vegetation, and ensuring the structure remained sound. He explained the abandoned appearance was deliberate, to keep away the curious and potential trespassers. "Mrs. Grace left money set aside for basic maintenance," continued Mr. Henry. "I always knew that one day someone special from the family would return." Sarah felt a sudden contraction and had to lean against the wall. Marcus rushed to help her, worried that the emotion and physical exertion of the visit were affecting the pregnancy. "I'm fine," said Sarah, taking a deep breath. "It's just the baby reminding us it's time to go back." But Mr. Henry observed Sarah carefully and noticed signs that Marcus hadn't yet seen. The woman was pale, sweating more than normal, and the contractions seemed to be intensifying. "Young lady, how many months pregnant are you?" asked Mr. Henry with concern. 8 months, replied Sarah, trying to hide another discomfort. "I think you'd better go to the hospital," said the elderly man, with the authority of someone who has seen many births. "These contractions don't seem normal for 8 months. Marcus became alarmed and helped Sarah to her feet. The walk back to the car would be long, and he feared his wife was truly going into premature labor. "Mr. Henry, do you have a phone? I need to call an ambulance," said Marcus, trying to stay calm. "Yes, I do. My house is right over there," replied the neighbor, pointing to a simple structure visible among the trees. "But cell service is spotty here. I'll take you to the main road in my truck." While Mr. Henry ran to get the vehicle, Sarah had a stronger contraction that made her double over in pain. Marcus held her, whispering words of reassurance, but he himself was terrified. "Marcus, if anything happens to me," began Sarah. "Don't talk nonsense," interrupted Marcus. "Nothing's going to happen. We'll get to the hospital and everything will be fine." Mr. Henry returned quickly with an old but well-kept truck. Marcus helped Sarah into the cab, and the three set off down the dirt road toward the main highway. During the journey, Sarah had 2 more intense contractions that confirmed everyone's worst fears. "The child wants to be born today," said Mr. Henry, accelerating as much as the road allowed. "I've seen this before. Sometimes babies choose special moments." When they reached the highway, Mr. Henry called the emergency medical services on his cell phone. In 15 minutes, an ambulance arrived on the scene, and the paramedics took over Sarah's care. Marcus got into the ambulance, while Mr. Henry promised to meet them at the hospital later. During the ride to the hospital, Sarah held Marcus's hand and thought about everything she had discovered that morning. It was as if the cabin had awakened something ancestral within her, a connection to generations of strong women who had faced similar hardships. "The baby wants to know the family history," said Sarah between contractions, trying to keep her humor. "Or wants to be born in the same place where her great-great-grandmother went through hardships," replied Marcus, squeezing her hand. At the hospital, Sarah was immediately taken to the obstetrics center. The doctors confirmed she was in premature labor, but that the baby seemed healthy and had a good chance if born at that moment. While Sarah prepared to give birth, Marcus called her mother, Mrs. Dorothy, quickly explaining the situation. Mrs. Dorothy's reaction was strange, a prolonged silence followed by a muffled exclamation that Marcus couldn't understand. "Mrs. Dorothy, are you all right?" asked Marcus. "Marcus, did you find anything in the cabin? Letters, photographs?" asked Mrs. Dorothy with urgency in her voice. "How do you know about the cabin?" Marcus was surprised. "I'll be right there," said Mrs. Dorothy, hanging up abruptly. 3 hours later, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl, despite the prematurity. The baby cried loudly when born, as if announcing her arrival to the world with determination. Sarah held her in her arms and felt an indescribable emotion, mixing relief, love, and the feeling that this birth had a special meaning. "What should we name her?" asked Marcus, gently touching his daughter's little face. "Grace," answered Sarah without hesitation, "in honor of the great-grandmother I never met, but who left me the greatest inheritance of all, the truth about our family." Mrs. Dorothy arrived at the hospital 2 hours after the birth, carrying a mysterious bag and an expression that mixed anxiety and relief. When she saw the newborn granddaughter, her eyes filled with tears, but Marcus noticed there was something more behind that emotion. "Mom, what's going on?" asked Sarah, noticing Mrs. Dorothy's strange behavior. "How did you know about the cabin?" Mrs. Dorothy sat down heavily in the chair next to the hospital bed and opened the bag she had brought. From inside, she took out an envelope similar to the one Sarah had found in the cabin, with the same elegant handwriting. "Sarah, I also received a letter from your great-grandmother," confessed Mrs. Dorothy. "More than 20 years ago. She asked me never to speak about the paternal family until you discovered it on your own." The revelation left Sarah and Marcus shocked. All these years, Mrs. Dorothy had known about the existence of Mrs. Grace and the true family history, but had remained silent following the letter's instructions. "Why did you never tell me anything about my paternal grandfather?" asked Sarah. "Whenever I asked, you would change the subject." "Because your great-grandmother made me promise that the truth would only be revealed when the time was right," explained Mrs. Dorothy. "She said some truths can only be understood when a person is emotionally prepared." Mrs. Dorothy opened the letter she had kept for decades and read aloud. "Dear Dorothy, I know it may seem strange to receive a letter from someone you've never met, but I need to trust you to protect my family until the right time comes." The letter explained that Mrs. Grace had followed Sarah's life since birth, through acquaintances in town who gave her news. She knew about her great-granddaughter's determined personality and predicted that, when the right time came, Sarah would take the initiative to discover her origins. "She knew you better than we imagined," said Mrs. Dorothy, looking at her daughter with admiration. "She knew you wouldn't give up until you discovered the truth." The letter to Mrs. Dorothy also contained information Sarah hadn't yet discovered. Mrs. Grace had left detailed instructions on how to handle resistance from other family members, including specific names of relatives who might try to stop Sarah from keeping the property. "There's one more thing," said Mrs. Dorothy, hesitating. "Your great-grandmother didn't pass from this world naturally. She was found in the cabin at peace, holding a photograph of you as a baby." The revelation touched Sarah deeply, who understood that her great-grandmother had waited until she was sure the truth would be preserved before departing. It was as if she had held on until she could ensure the family story wouldn't be lost. Mrs. Dorothy then told details Sarah didn't know about her paternal grandfather. He had spent his entire life wondering about his origin, creating fanciful stories to explain his mother's absence. He could never reconcile with the feeling of abandonment, and this deeply affected his ability to form solid family bonds. "Your grandfather was a good man, but he carried a deep sadness," explained Mrs. Dorothy. "He always said he felt like a tree without roots." Sarah looked at her newborn daughter and felt the responsibility to break that cycle of abandonment and misunderstanding. Grace represented a new chance for the family, an opportunity to heal old wounds and build a future based on truth and unconditional love. Over the following days, as Sarah recovered in the hospital, she and Marcus received unexpected visitors. Mr. Henry appeared carrying flowers from the cabin's garden and more stories about Mrs. Grace. He also brought a small suitcase with personal items that the great-grandmother had asked to be delivered to the family when the right time came. Among the items were simple jewelry, a finely crafted wooden rosary, silver sewing needles, and a notebook with home remedy recipes. Each item carried memories of a woman who turned hardship into wisdom and loneliness into generosity. "Mrs. Grace told me these items should go to the first girl in the family born after her passing," explained Mr. Henry, handing the suitcase to Sarah. On the third day of hospitalization, Sarah received a visit that would completely change the course of events. A man of about 60, well-dressed and with an authoritative bearing, introduced himself as Richard Harrison, a distant cousin of her late grandfather. "I came as soon as I heard you were claiming Aunt Grace's property," said Richard, without any courtesy. "We need to talk about this situation." Marcus immediately positioned himself between the man and Sarah, sensing the tension in the room. Sarah, still recovering from childbirth, asked Marcus to let the man speak, curious to understand his intentions. "That property has brought problems to our family for decades," continued Richard. "It would be better for everyone if you simply sold the land and forgot this story." "And why would it be better?" asked Sarah directly. Richard hesitated, revealing there was much more behind his concern than he was initially willing to admit. Sarah realized he knew more about her great-grandmother's story than he let on. "Because that woman caused enough scandal for our family," Richard finally said, showing his true prejudiced nature. "We don't need this stirred up now." "What kind of scandal?" insisted Sarah, her determination strengthening in the face of resistance. Richard, realizing Sarah would not be easily intimidated, changed his strategy. He offered to buy the property for a sum he claimed was generous, but which Sarah sensed was far below the land's real value. "I have no interest in selling," said Sarah firmly. "That property is my family's history, and I have a right to know it." The conversation grew tense when Richard insinuated he could legally challenge the validity of the inheritance. He claimed Mrs. Grace had no right to leave the property to Sarah, as she had been cast out of the family decades ago. Marcus, losing patience, asked Richard to leave the room. The man left, but not before warning he would return with lawyers if necessary. His visit made it clear the fight for the property would be more complicated than Sarah had imagined. That night, Sarah had trouble sleeping. She was physically recovering well from childbirth, but mentally struggled to process all the revelations of the past few days. Little Grace slept peacefully in her arms, unaware of the complexities of the adult world awaiting her. "Marcus, am I doing the right thing?" Sarah asked in the dark. "Maybe it's better to forget all this and focus on our family." "Sarah, you've spent your whole life not knowing your paternal roots," replied Marcus. "Now that you have the chance to discover the truth, you can't give up because of pressure from some selfish relatives." Marcus had spent the last few days reflecting on everything they had discovered. Initially skeptical, he now understood the importance of that property, not just for Sarah, but for building a solid family identity for their daughter. The next morning, Sarah was discharged from the hospital. Before leaving the hospital, she had a serious conversation with Mrs. Dorothy about the next steps. Her mother revealed that there were more letters from Mrs. Grace kept at home, including specific instructions on how to deal with family resistance. "My daughter, your great-grandmother predicted every move happening now," said Mrs. Dorothy. "She left a detailed plan to protect you and the property." Back at home, Sarah spent the first few days caring for little Grace and studying all the documents left by her great-grandmother. Among the letters was one that detailed the motivations of some family members to keep the history secret. The letter revealed that Richard Harrison and other cousins had built their social reputations by hiding any connection to Aunt Grace's scandal. Over the years, they spread distorted versions of the story, portraying her as an irresponsible woman who had abandoned the family. "They're afraid the truth will destroy the image they've built," explained Marcus after reading the letter. "That's why they want you to sell the property so badly." Sarah also discovered that some relatives had tried to take possession of the property illegally after Mrs. Grace's departure, but were prevented by the will registered at the notary's office. The false property injunction was a way to discourage investigations and keep the place inaccessible. 2 weeks after Grace's birth, Sarah decided to return to the cabin with her daughter and Marcus. She felt the need to show the baby the place where everything had begun, and also wanted to search for more clues that could help her fully understand the family history. The trip was different this time. Sarah felt stronger, supported by the revelations in the letters and the birth of her daughter. Marcus had become an enthusiastic ally in preserving the property, understanding its importance for the family's future. Mr. Henry was waiting for them at the cabin, accompanied by an elderly lady whom he introduced as Mrs. Margaret, one of the women helped by Mrs. Grace in her youth. "This girl was also raised by Mrs. Grace," said Mr. Henry, pointing to Mrs. Margaret. "She has many stories to tell." Mrs. Margaret, despite her advanced age, maintained good memory and contagious energy. She shared that she had arrived at the cabin at 16, pregnant and rejected by her family. Mrs. Grace not only took her in, but also taught her to sew and care for herself. "Your great-grandmother was like a mother to all of us," said Mrs. Margaret, gently holding little Grace. "She said a woman alone could be strong, but several women together were invincible." Mrs. Margaret's stories revealed aspects of Mrs. Grace's personality that the letters hadn't fully captured. She was not only generous and welcoming, but also a clever strategist who had created an informal support network among the women in the region. "She taught that every daughter born here should grow up knowing she had a sisterhood," continued Mrs. Margaret. "That's why all the children considered themselves family, even without blood ties." Sarah understood that the cabin represented much more than a family property. It was a symbol of female resistance, a place where generations of women had found strength to face adversity and build better futures for their children. During this second visit, Sarah explored areas of the property she hadn't seen the first time. Behind the cabin, she discovered a small cemetery where Mrs. Grace had buried pets and planted fruit trees in memory of each child she had helped bring into the world. "Each tree represents a life that began here," explained Mrs. Margaret, showing small wooden plaques with engraved initials. "Your great-grandmother insisted on marking every birth." Marcus found a plaque with the initials of Sarah's grandfather, confirming he had indeed been born on that property. The discovery deeply moved Sarah, who finally had physical confirmation of the connection between her family and that special place. As they explored the property, an unfamiliar car approached on the dirt road. Richard Harrison stepped out of the vehicle, accompanied by 2 men in suits, whom Sarah suspected were lawyers or people hired to intimidate her. "I thought we made it clear you shouldn't keep coming here," said Richard in an aggressive tone. "This property does not legally belong to you." Marcus positioned himself between the men and his family, but Sarah decided to face the situation directly. She was holding little Grace in her arms, and her presence seemed to confuse the unwanted visitors. "Show me a document that proves this property isn't mine," said Sarah calmly, "or leave my land." One of the men in suits stepped forward and presented papers that claimed to contest the validity of Mrs. Grace's will. Sarah quickly examined the documents and realized they were vague challenges without a solid legal basis. "These papers do not invalidate my inheritance," said Sarah, handing back the documents. "They are just attempts at intimidation." Mrs. Margaret, who had been silently observing the argument, approached Richard with an authority surprising for her age. "Richard Harrison, I knew you when you were a boy," she said firmly. "Your family always knew Grace was an honorable woman. It's a shame to see you repeating lies after all these years." Mrs. Margaret's intervention completely changed the dynamic of the situation. Richard became visibly uncomfortable being confronted by someone who knew the truth about the family's past. "You don't understand the current situation," Richard tried to counter. "This property brings complex legal problems." "I understand perfectly," replied Mrs. Margaret. "You're afraid the truth about your aunt will destroy the lie you've told your own family." Mrs. Margaret's accusation hit the mark. Marcus realized Richard had built his life by hiding the existence of Mrs. Grace, probably telling his children and grandchildren that the family was traditional and respectable without any blemish on its past. Confronted with the possibility of having his secrets exposed, Richard retreated slightly. He asked to speak with Sarah in private, dismissing the men he had brought. Marcus hesitated, but Sarah agreed to the conversation, staying close to the others for safety. "Sarah, you don't understand the consequences of keeping this property," said Richard, trying a more conciliatory tone. "My family has built important businesses in the region. If the story of Aunt Grace spreads, it could harm our commercial reputation." "And that's my problem?" asked Sarah directly. Richard then revealed the true reason for his concern. He had built a small business empire in the region based on his reputation as a traditional and trustworthy family. Conservative clients and investors might question his credibility if they discovered he had lied about his family origins. "How much do you want to forget this story?" asked Richard, showing his true self-interested nature. Sarah looked at little Grace in her arms, and then at the cabin where her great-grandmother had raised her grandfather with so much sacrifice. The idea of selling that story for money made her sick. "There is no amount that would make me abandon my family history," said Sarah firmly. "And if you try to intimidate me again, I will go to the local press to tell the truth about our family." Sarah's threat left Richard alarmed. He realized he had underestimated his distant cousin's determination and that his intimidation tactics wouldn't work. With no immediate alternatives, he backed down, but not before warning that he would return with a different strategy. After Richard and his companions left, Mrs. Margaret embraced Sarah with pride. "You have the same spirit as your great-grandmother," said the elderly lady. "She would be so proud to see how you defended her memory." Mr. Henry, who had observed the entire confrontation, offered his help to protect the property. He revealed he knew other neighbors who respected Mrs. Grace's memory and would be willing to support Sarah against any intimidation attempts. "This land is respected by the whole community," said Mr. Henry. "Richard may have money and influence in the city, but here everyone knows who truly deserves respect." Sarah understood she had more allies than she imagined. The support network created by her great-grandmother decades ago still existed, now composed of the children and grandchildren of the women who had been helped in the cabin. During the following weeks, Sarah divided her time between caring for little Grace and planning the future of the property. She decided it wasn't enough to just preserve the cabin. She wanted to transform it into something that would actively honor her great-grandmother's memory. Marcus suggested they consult a lawyer specializing in real estate law to ensure the inheritance was fully protected against future attempts by Richard. Sarah agreed, but insisted any legal action should be transparent and based on truth, not underhanded maneuvers. The consulted lawyer confirmed that Sarah's inheritance was absolutely legal and incontestable. Mrs. Grace had registered the will correctly, and paid all property taxes due for decades. Richard's attempts to challenge the inheritance had no legal basis. Even more interesting, said the lawyer, is that your great-grandmother left documents proving some relatives tried to illegally take possession of the property after her departure. This could be used against them if they try frivolous lawsuits. Sarah discovered that Mrs. Grace had been far more strategic than anyone had imagined. She had not only legally protected the property, but also documented all her relatives' attempts to distort the family history. With the legal situation clarified, Sarah began thinking about how to restore and use the property. She wanted to maintain the cabin's historical character, but also create a functional space that could serve the community in some meaningful way. Mrs. Margaret suggested Sarah transform the property into a support center for pregnant women in vulnerable situations, continuing the work Mrs. Grace had begun decades ago. Nowadays, many girls go through the same problems we faced in our time, explained Mrs. Margaret. They need the same kind of support your great-grandmother offered. The idea deeply moved Sarah. She realized she could transform her personal inheritance into a community legacy, creating something that would benefit other families while honoring Mrs. Grace's memory. Marcus, initially worried about the costs of maintaining a rural property, began to get excited about the possibility of creating something meaningful. He suggested they seek partnerships with local organizations and perhaps even government support for the project. During one of her visits to the cabin to plan the renovations, Sarah made a discovery that would completely change her plans. In the attic of the building, in an area she hadn't explored before, she found an old chest full of handmade baby clothes and dozens of never-sent letters. The letters were all addressed to Mrs. Grace's son, Sarah's grandfather. They had been written over the years, documenting the child's first steps, his early words, his favorite games, and especially the unconditional love she felt for him. "Marcus, listen to this," said Sarah, with tears in her eyes, reading one of the letters. "My dear son, today you turned 3 and asked your first question about your daddy. I didn't know what to answer, but I promise that when you grow up, I will tell you the whole truth about the love that brought us into this world." Each letter revealed Mrs. Grace's pain at not being able to raise her son the way she wanted, but also her determination to give him the best possible future. She meticulously documented every aspect of the child's development, as if these letters would one day be given to him. A specific letter, written when the boy was 5, explained why she had decided to give him to relatives in the city. "My love, you deserve to study in good schools and have opportunities that I cannot offer here. It is the most difficult sacrifice of my life, but it is out of love that I am doing this." Sarah understood that Mrs. Grace had not been forced to abandon her son, as she had initially interpreted. In fact, she had made the painful decision to give him to relatives because she believed it would give him better opportunities in life. "She wasn't cast out," said Sarah, reinterpreting the entire story. "She made a conscious sacrifice for her son's future." Marcus observed the baby clothes in the trunk, all handmade with exceptional care. There were little overalls, embroidered blankets, knitted booties, and even some hand-carved wooden toys. It was evident that each piece had been made with infinite love. "She kept all of this hoping that one day she could tell the family the truth," said Marcus, moved by the discovery. Among the clothes, Sarah found a small notebook where Mrs. Grace had recorded recipes for food she made for her son, stories she told him to sleep, and even drawings he had made as a child. It was a complete record of the childhood they had shared before the separation. The discovery of this emotional treasure completely changed Sarah's perspective on her great-grandmother. She was not just a victim of social prejudice, but a woman who had made difficult decisions based on the purest maternal love. That night at home, Sarah had a long conversation with Mrs. Dorothy about the new revelations. Her mother confirmed that Sarah's grandfather had always wondered about his origins, but had never received satisfactory answers from the relatives who raised him. "Your grandfather died wondering if his mother had loved him," said Mrs. Dorothy sadly. "If he had known how hard she fought to give him the best possible future." Sarah decided it was important to share these discoveries with other family members, including uncles and cousins, who might be interested in knowing the truth about their origins. She organized a family meeting to present all the documents and photographs found in the cabin. The family's response was divided. Some relatives were moved to discover Mrs. Grace's true story and apologized for having believed the distorted versions. Others, especially those close to Richard, remained resistant to changing the established family narrative. During the meeting, Sarah announced her intention to transform the property into a community support center. The proposal generated intense discussions, with some family members supporting the initiative and others concerned about possible complications. A younger cousin named Christopher showed enthusiasm for the project and offered his engineering skills to help plan the renovations. His cousin Amanda, who worked in social services, also expressed interest in participating in the initiative. "This is exactly what our family needs," said Christopher, "a way to honor our past by building something positive for the future." The formation of this family support corps strengthened Sarah's confidence in her plans. She realized that not all relatives were stuck in old prejudices and that there was potential to unite the family around a common purpose. Richard, however, intensified his campaign against the project. He began spreading in the community that Sarah was trying to commercially exploit the family's memory and that the proposed center would bring social problems to the area. Richard's resistance motivated Sarah to accelerate her plans. She decided that the best way to combat the lies would be by demonstrating in practice the project's benefits for the community. With the help of Christopher and Amanda, Sarah developed a detailed plan for renovating and using the property. The project included the complete restoration of the original cabin, the construction of basic support facilities, and the creation of a community garden following the techniques Mrs. Grace had used. Mr. Henry became a valuable ally, offering practical knowledge about the property and connecting Sarah with other neighbors interested in supporting the project. Mrs. Margaret took on the role of historical advisor, ensuring the renovations respected the original spirit of the place. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now, continuing. 3 months after Grace's birth, the cabin renovations began. Sarah divided her time between caring for her daughter and supervising the work, always with the little one in her arms, or sleeping in an improvised crib in the shade of the large tree. The first days of renovation revealed architectural surprises that confirmed Mrs. Grace's care for the property. The cabin's structure was in excellent condition, protected by traditional construction techniques that had withstood time. Christopher discovered that the foundations had been reinforced and that the drainage system was working perfectly. "Your great-grandmother really understood construction," said Christopher, admiring the quality of the structures. "She designed this cabin to last for generations." During excavations to improve the electrical system, the workers made an intriguing discovery. Buried near the cabin's foundations, they found a ceramic jar containing old coins and some simple jewelry, along with a letter explaining they were emergency resources for difficult times. The discovery of this small treasure definitively resolved Sarah's financial concerns about maintaining the property. More importantly, the letter accompanying the coins contained specific instructions on how to use these resources to help other families in need. "This money was saved through sacrifice over the years," the letter read, "and should be used only to help women and children facing the hardships I endured. May it be a seed to plant hope in hearts that need support." Sarah understood that even that discovery had been planned by her great-grandmother. Mrs. Grace had anticipated that the costs of maintaining and renovating the property would be a challenge and had left specific resources for that purpose. News about Sarah's project began to spread through the region, attracting the attention of several social organizations. A non-profit organization specializing in support for at-risk pregnant women made contact, offering technical support and possible funding to expand the center. The NGO's coordinator, a woman named Jennifer Anderson, visited the property and was impressed with the project's potential and the story behind it. "It's rare to find initiatives that combine historical preservation with real social impact," said Jennifer. "The work your great-grandmother did here decades ago was far ahead of its time." Jennifer explained that many modern pregnancy support centers struggled to create a welcoming and familiar environment. Mrs. Grace's cabin offered exactly that kind of atmosphere, in addition to being located in a natural setting that favored tranquility and recovery. The partnership with the NGO brought technical and financial resources that allowed Sarah to significantly expand her plans. Instead of just restoring the original cabin, she could now build complementary facilities that would transform the property into a comprehensive support center. The expanded project included the construction of small individual cabins to accommodate women needing temporary shelter, a community activities room, a large kitchen for shared meals, and even a small office for basic medical care. During the planning of the expansion, Sarah received an unexpected visit from a middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Linda Williams. Linda explained that she had grown up in the region and had always heard stories about Mrs. Grace from her own grandmother. "My grandmother used to say that Mrs. Grace saved many lives here," said Linda. "When I heard about your project, I had to come meet you in person." Linda revealed that she worked as a psychologist specializing in family support and offered her volunteer services to the center. Her experience would be crucial to ensuring the support offered to women was not only material, but also emotional and psychological. "What your great-grandmother did intuitively, we can do in a more structured way today," explained Linda, combining her human warmth with modern psychological support techniques. Linda's arrival marked a turning point in the project. Sarah realized she was creating something much larger than she had initially imagined. The center would become a true model of how to combine family tradition and social innovation. As construction work progressed, Richard intensified his efforts to sabotage the project. He began questioning the building permits, alleging irregularities, and tried to convince other rural landowners that the center would bring social problems to the region. Richard's tactics, however, had the opposite effect of what was intended. Many neighbors were offended by the prejudiced insinuations and declared public support for Sarah's project. Mr. Henry organized a community meeting where local residents could learn in detail about the plans for the center. "We all know who really caused problems for this family," said Mr. Henry during the meeting, indirectly referring to Richard. "Mrs. Grace was always respected here, and her great-granddaughter deserves the same respect." The community meeting became a neighborhood unity event. Several residents shared memories of how Mrs. Grace or her descendants had helped their families over the years. Sarah discovered that her great-grandmother's positive influence had extended far beyond the property. An elderly farmer named John Thomas recounted that Mrs. Grace had taught his mother how to deliver babies when there were no doctors in the region. Another resident, Mrs. Louise, revealed that she had learned sewing techniques from her that had sustained her family during difficult years. "This land has always been blessed," said Mrs. Louise. "It's only fair to keep helping people." The community's support gave Sarah the confidence she needed to face Richard's pressures. She decided she would no longer hide behind discreet family meetings and would make the entire project public, including the true story of Mrs. Grace. Sarah organized a press conference on the property, inviting local journalists to see the center under construction and hear the family's full story. The presence of the local media intimidated Richard, who realized his behind-the-scenes tactics would no longer work. During the press conference, Sarah presented the letters, photographs, and documents found in the cabin. She told the complete story of Mrs. Grace, from the family's rejection to the creation of the refuge for women in need. The narrative deeply moved the journalists present. One reporter asked about some family members' resistance to the project. Sarah answered diplomatically, but made it clear she would not be intimidated by people who preferred to hide the truth rather than face the past. "Our family had an extraordinary woman who was misunderstood in her time," Sarah said to the cameras. "My goal is to honor her memory by creating something that continues to help other families." The report about the center was broadcast on regional television and published in local newspapers. The public response was overwhelmingly positive, with many people offering donations and volunteer work to support the project. Richard, seeing his intimidation strategy fail publicly, decided to change his approach. He sought out Sarah at home, without the lawyers or enforcers he had brought before, and asked to have an honest conversation. "Sarah, I think we got off on the wrong foot," said Richard, trying to sound conciliatory. "Perhaps we can find a way to work together." Sarah received him in her home, but kept Marcus present throughout the conversation. She was curious to hear what Richard had to say, but suspicious of his intentions. Richard then revealed the true extent of his troubles. His businesses were facing financial difficulties, and he had hoped to sell Aunt Grace's property to settle his debts. The discovery that Sarah would not sell the land had significantly complicated his plans. "I need to be honest with you," said Richard. "I was counting on the sale of this property to save my company." "But the property was never yours to sell," replied Sarah, with no sympathy for his situation. Richard then made a surprising confession. He admitted he had always known Mrs. Grace was a good person, but had chosen to perpetuate the lies about her to protect his own social image. Now, with his business in crisis, he realized he had wasted decades maintaining an unnecessary lie. "You are right to want to honor her memory," said Richard with genuine sadness. "I was a coward for not defending my aunt when I should have." Richard's admission marked a turning point in the family dynamic. Sarah realized that behind the arrogance and intimidation attempts was a man facing his own personal crises. "What do you want from me now?" Sarah asked directly. Richard asked if he could work at the center as a way to redeem his past actions. He offered his business management skills and his connections in the business community to help the project succeed. "I can't undo what I did," said Richard, "but I can try to honor Aunt Grace's memory the right way." Sarah was surprised by the proposal, but decided to give Richard a chance. She set clear conditions. He must help spread the true story of Mrs. Grace and use his influence to support the center, not to sabotage it. "If you truly want to redeem yourself," said Sarah, "start by telling your own family the truth about who our aunt really was." Richard's conversion from antagonist to ally completely changed the project's dynamics. His business connections brought new supporters and resources that significantly accelerated the construction work. 3 months after the press conference, the Grace Support Center was ready to be inaugurated. The property had been transformed into a welcoming complex that maintained the rustic charm of the original cabin while offering all the necessary modern facilities. Mrs. Grace's cabin had been carefully restored and turned into the heart of the center. Its walls now housed a library with books on motherhood, childcare, and personal development. The original kitchen had been expanded, but kept the wood-burning stove that Mrs. Grace had used. The new constructions blended perfectly with the landscape, following the same architectural style as the original cabin. Small guest houses offered private accommodation for women needing temporary shelter, each decorated with elements that told part of the place's story. The great centennial tree remained the central symbol of the property, with benches built around its trunk where people could sit to talk or simply contemplate. Sarah had insisted that all constructions respect the tree's shade, preserving its role as the natural guardian of the place. The center's inauguration was marked by a simple but moving ceremony. Sarah invited all the people who had contributed to making the project a reality, from the neighbors who offered support to the professionals who worked on the constructions. Mrs. Margaret, now considered the center's official matriarch, had the honor of cutting the inaugural ribbon. In her 80s, she represented the living connection between Mrs. Grace's original work and its modern continuation. "Grace is smiling from heaven, seeing what you've done here," said Mrs. Margaret during the ceremony. She always said that one good deed plants seeds that grow long after. During the inauguration, several women who had benefited from the services during construction shared their testimonies. A young woman named Jessica told how the center's support had helped her leave an abusive relationship and build an independent life for herself and her son. "This place gave me back hope when I thought I had lost everything," said Jessica, holding her baby in her arms. "It's more than a shelter, it's a family." Another beneficiary, Mary Elizabeth, explained how the center had helped her during a high-risk pregnancy. She had received not only accommodation and medical care, but also emotional support that was crucial to her recovery. "The people here don't just care for your body," said Mary Elizabeth. "They care for your soul, too." The testimonies confirmed for Sarah that she had made the right decisions in turning her personal inheritance into a community resource. The center was fulfilling exactly the purpose Mrs. Grace had envisioned decades ago. During the ceremony, Richard stood up to make a public speech. Many of those present were surprised, as they knew of his initial resistance to the project. "I want to publicly apologize for trying to stop this project," said Richard with a choked voice. "My Aunt Grace was an extraordinary woman, and I was a coward for not honoring her memory sooner." Richard's public apology moved many of those present, especially the family members who had witnessed the initial conflicts. Sarah felt that moment represented the beginning of a new phase in family relations. "Today isn't just about inaugurating a center," said Richard. "It's about restoring truth and unity in our family." Richard's speech was followed by warm applause from the audience. Sarah realized the project had achieved something she hadn't planned, healing old family wounds and uniting people who had been separated by misunderstandings and pride. After the official ceremony, Sarah walked around the property carrying little Grace. She stopped under the large tree and looked around, seeing children playing, women talking on the benches, families sharing meals in the common areas. "What do you think, little one?" whispered Sarah to her daughter. "Do you think your great-great-grandmother would be proud?" As if answering the question, little Grace smiled for the first time since she was born, a radiant smile that filled Sarah's heart with joy and confirmation. Marcus approached the two and embraced his family under the shade of the ancient tree. "I think she's saying yes," he said, looking at his daughter's smile. That night, after all the guests had left, Sarah, Marcus, and little Grace were alone on the property for the first time. They walked along the newly lit paths, observing how the place had been transformed while keeping its original essence. In the restored cabin, Sarah found a letter that had been left on the table during the inauguration. It was from a woman named Michelle, who had read about the center in the newspaper and wanted to share her own story. Michelle wrote that her grandmother had been one of the women helped by Mrs. Grace in the 1960s. Her grandmother had always told stories about the kindness and wisdom of the woman who had taken her in during a difficult pregnancy. "My grandmother used to say that Mrs. Grace saved 2 lives back then, hers and my father's, who was born in this cabin," wrote Michelle. "She always taught us that we should pass on the kindness we receive." The letter went on to explain that Michelle had become a nurse specializing in obstetric care and would like to offer her services to the center. She saw the opportunity as a way to honor the memory of her grandmother and of Mrs. Grace. "It's amazing how stories connect through time," said Marcus, reading the letter along with Sarah. "Your great-grandmother planted seeds that are still sprouting." Sarah understood that the center was not just a continuation of Mrs. Grace's work, but also the creation of a new support network that would extend through generations. Every person helped by the center would potentially be someone who would help others in the future. In the first weeks of operation, the center received more requests for help than Sarah had anticipated. Women from various towns in the region sought support, from teenagers rejected by their families to adult women fleeing abusive relationships. The high demand confirmed that the work started by Mrs. Grace was still urgently needed in today's society. Despite the social advances of recent decades, many women still faced the same difficulties of family rejection and lack of support during vulnerable moments. Linda, the psychologist who had volunteered, became a key piece in the center's operation. She developed emotional support programs that perfectly complemented the practical care offered by the team. "What you've created here is unique," said Linda during an evaluation meeting. "It combines traditional human warmth with modern professional support in a very natural way." Sarah discovered that managing the center required skills she didn't know she possessed. She developed leadership abilities, resource management, and conflict mediation skills that surprised her. It was as if Mrs. Grace's legacy had awakened dormant potential within her. Marcus took on the responsibility for the physical maintenance of the property and proved to be a talented gardener. He expanded Mrs. Grace's original vegetable garden, creating an organic food production system that helped sustain the center and taught useful skills to the beneficiaries. "I never thought I'd become a farmer," joked Marcus, showing Sarah the first tomatoes he had harvested. "But there's something therapeutic about working with the land." Little Grace was growing quickly in the center's environment, surrounded by a community of women who treated her like a niece or granddaughter. Sarah noticed that her daughter was developing an especially empathetic personality, always curious about the stories of the people around her. "She's going to grow up understanding that families can be formed in many different ways," observed Linda, watching the girl interact with the other children at the center. 6 months after the opening, Sarah received a call that left her deeply moved. It was from a journalist from the capital who had seen the report about the center and wanted to do a special feature for national television. "Your story represents something very important about preserving family memory and social impact," explained the journalist. "We would like to show your work to a larger audience." The prospect of national exposure made Sarah nervous, but also excited about the possibility of inspiring others to value their own family stories. She agreed to participate in the report, but asked that the main focus be on the center's current work, not just the story of the past. The television crew spent 3 days on the property, filming the center's operations and interviewing beneficiaries, volunteers, and family members. The report captured not only the physical transformation of the place, but also the emotional impact of the project on the people involved. During one of the interviews, Sarah was asked what she had learned as the most important thing throughout this process. "I learned that our family stories are more complex and precious than we imagine," she replied, "and that honoring our ancestors means continuing the work they started, adapting it to today's needs." The national report brought unexpected recognition and support to the center. Donations arrived from various parts of the country, and other communities contacted them interested in creating similar projects. A federal university offered a partnership to study the center's model and develop a replication program for other regions. Sarah accepted the partnership, seeing the opportunity to multiply the impact of Mrs. Grace's work. "Your great-grandmother is becoming known throughout the United States," joked Marcus, showing Sarah positive comments online about the report. The national success of the project also brought unexpected responsibilities. Sarah found herself being invited to give lectures and events on women's empowerment and family memory preservation. She accepted some invitations, always accompanied by little Grace. During a lecture in New York, Sarah met other women who had discovered interesting family stories and were working to preserve them. She realized that her experience was part of a larger movement of reconnecting with family roots. "Every family has its own Graces waiting to be discovered," Sarah said during the lecture. "It takes courage to seek the truth, but the reward is worth all the effort." Back at the center, Sarah found a new surprise waiting for her. Mr. Henry had organized a small exhibition with photographs and personal belongings of other women from the region who had been helped by Mrs. Grace decades ago. "I thought it would be important to show that Mrs. Grace's story is also the story of many other families," explained Mr. Henry. The exhibition revealed that Mrs. Grace's impact had been even greater than Sarah had imagined. Dozens of families in the region had direct or indirect connections to the work she had developed in the cabin. Among the displayed items were baby clothes made by Mrs. Grace, handwritten copies of home remedy recipes, and even some wooden toys she had carved for the children. Each item told a story of care and dedication. A special discovery was a small notebook where Mrs. Grace had recorded the names of all the children born on the property over the years. The list included more than 40 names, each representing a life that had begun under her protection. 42 children, counted Sarah, moved. How many families were formed thanks to her work? Marcus suggested that Sarah try to locate some of these people, now adults, to invite them to see the modern center. The idea resulted in an unforgettable celebration when 15 former Mrs. Grace's babies gathered at the property. The meeting was emotional for everyone present. Men and women in their 50s and 60s walked around the property where they had been born, many visiting the place for the first time since childhood. "It's surreal to be here again," said one of the visitors named Paul. "My mother always told me about Mrs. Grace's kindness, but I never imagined I'd return one day." Each visitor brought their own memories and family stories. Some had become successful in their careers, others had faced difficulties, but all carried gratitude for the opportunity of life they had received in that place. One of the visitors, named Rose, was now the principal of a public school in the capital. She said she had dedicated her career to educating underprivileged children as a way to honor Mrs. Grace's example. "She taught me, through my mother, that one person can make a difference in the lives of many others," said Rose. "I've tried to apply that lesson in my profession." The meeting of Mrs. Grace's babies became an annual event at the center. Each year, more people discovered their connections to the place and joined the celebration. The event transformed into a community festival that strengthened the bonds between all families, touched by Mrs. Grace's legacy. During the second annual meeting, Sarah made an announcement that surprised everyone present. She was pregnant again, and the second child would be born around the same time Mrs. Grace had given birth to her first child decades before. "It seems our family is destined to have important moments on this land," said Sarah, smiling and stroking her still small belly. The news of the second pregnancy was received with joy by the entire center community. Grace, now an active child of almost 2 years, seemed excited about the prospect of having a little brother. Marcus joked that they had become a community center family, since they practically lived on the property most of the week. They had converted one of the small houses into a permanent residence, keeping the apartment in the capital only for special occasions. "I never thought I'd adapt so well to rural life," said Marcus, watching Grace play under the large tree with other children from the center. "But this place has a special magic." Sarah's second pregnancy coincided with the expansion of the center's services. The partnership with the university had resulted in the development of new programs, including professional training courses for the women served. Linda had created a psychological support program that was being studied as a model for other centers across the country. Her work had proven that the combination of human warmth and professional support produced exceptional results in the emotional recovery of the beneficiaries. "The secret is in the environment," explained Linda during an academic presentation. "This place conveys a sense of belonging that accelerates the emotional healing process." During the 7th month of her second pregnancy, Sarah received an unexpected visit that moved her deeply. A lady of approximately 80 years introduced herself as Beatrice, one of the last living friends of Mrs. Grace. "I helped your great-grandmother during many births here," said Beatrice, looking around the transformed property. "I never thought I'd live to see this place flourish again." Beatrice had worked as an informal midwife in the region for decades, often assisting Mrs. Grace with the births that took place in the cabin. She brought precious memories and practical details about how medical care was carried out at that time. "Mrs. Grace had blessed hands," Beatrice recounted. "We never lost a mother or a child under her care. She knew things that doctors didn't learn in books." Beatrice's stories revealed aspects of Mrs. Grace's personality that Sarah did not yet know. She had been not only welcoming, but also a skilled healer who mastered traditional techniques of care during pregnancy and childbirth. "She taught me that every birth is sacred," Beatrice continued, "and that our responsibility is to make both the mother and the child feel loved from the very first moment." Sarah asked Beatrice to document her memories on video, creating a historical record of the care techniques and philosophies that Mrs. Grace had developed. The material would become part of the center's permanent archive. When the time came for Sarah's second delivery, she decided she wanted to give birth on the property, on the same land where so many other women had brought their children into the world. With modern medical support, but maintaining the welcoming environment of the center, she had a deeply meaningful birthing experience. The boy was born healthy on a sunny October morning, under the shade of the large tree that had witnessed so many important family moments. Sarah and Marcus decided to name him Benjamin, in honor of the spirit of hope and rebirth that characterized the property. "Now we have Grace and Benjamin," said Marcus, holding his newborn son, "our own family of angels." Benjamin's birth on the property held special significance for the entire center community. It was the first official birth on the site since Mrs. Grace had stopped receiving pregnant women decades ago. Beatrice, now considered the center's honorary midwife, was present during the delivery, offering traditional support alongside the modern medical team. She said it was moving to see the property fulfilling its original purpose once again. "The circle is complete," said Beatrice, holding Benjamin in her arms. "This land has returned to blessing new beginnings." In the months following Benjamin's birth, the center reached a new level of recognition. The project was selected as a national model for public policies supporting women in vulnerable situations. Sarah was invited to participate in government committees to develop guidelines for similar centers in other regions of the country. She accepted the responsibilities, seeing an opportunity to multiply the impact of her great-grandmother's legacy on a national scale. Mrs. Grace never imagined her work would influence public policy, said Sarah during a meeting in Washington, D.C., but that is exactly what is happening. Engagement with public policy brought significant resources to expand the center, but it also brought bureaucracies and pressures that Sarah needed to learn to navigate. Marcus took on more responsibilities in the day-to-day administration to allow her to focus on advocacy activities. 3 years after its inauguration, the Grace Support Center had become a national reference. Dozens of similar centers had been created in other regions, all inspired by the model developed by Sarah and her team. Little Grace, now 4 years old, had grown up considering the center her natural home. She played freely with the children of the beneficiaries and treated all the women as aunts. Her empathetic and generous personality reflected the environment in which she was being raised. Benjamin, at 2 years old, showed a special curiosity for the vegetable garden and the animals that Marcus had introduced on the property. He spent hours watching the plants grow and helping with simple animal care tasks. "Our children are learning from an early age that there are many forms of family," observed Sarah, watching Benjamin share his snack with a visiting child. During the 4th annual gathering of Mrs. Grace's babies, Sarah announced she was working on creating a national foundation that would perpetuate the work started by her great-grandmother. The Grace Foundation would aim to create and maintain support centers for women across the country. "My dream is that every woman who needs support has access to a place like this," said Sarah during the event. "I want my great-grandmother's legacy to reach every region of the United States." The creation of the foundation represented the natural evolution of the project, transforming a local initiative into a national movement. Sarah knew she was taking on an enormous responsibility, but she felt prepared by the accumulated experience and the support of the network she had built. Richard, who had become one of the center's main supporters, offered his business skills to help structure the foundation. His transformation from antagonist to dedicated ally had been one of the most positive surprises of the entire process. "I want to dedicate the rest of my life to repairing the harm I caused to Aunt Grace's memory," said Richard during a foundation planning meeting. "This work has become my personal redemption." The foundation was officially launched in a ceremony at the original property, 5 years after Sarah's first visit to the cabin. The event brought together hundreds of people, including beneficiaries from all the centers created, government authorities, and family members from several generations. During the ceremony, Sarah read a letter she had written to Mrs. Grace, as if she could speak directly to her great-grandmother. "Dear great-grandmother Grace, you planted a small seed in this land, but it grew and turned into a forest that offers shelter to thousands of families. Your courage in times of difficulty has multiplied and continues to flourish through all the women you inspired." The reading of the letter deeply moved everyone present. Many people cried, remembering their own stories of overcoming hardship and the moments when they found support when they needed it most. Mrs. Margaret, now over 80 but still vibrant, gave a speech representing all the women who had been helped by Mrs. Grace over the years. "Grace taught us that a woman alone can face any storm," said Mrs. Margaret. "But she also showed us that women united can change the world." Mrs. Margaret's speech was followed by a special tribute. Sarah had commissioned the creation of a bronze statue depicting Mrs. Grace holding a baby to be installed under the great tree that had been the silent witness to the entire story. The statue was unveiled during the ceremony, showing Mrs. Grace with a serene and determined expression, looking toward the horizon with hope. At the base of the statue, a plaque read, "Grace Marie Thompson, a woman who turned difficulties into opportunities and loneliness into community." Little Grace, now 5 years old, was chosen to unveil the statue alongside Mrs. Margaret. The moment symbolized the passing of the legacy between generations, connecting the past with the future through the children who would grow up knowing the true family history. "Grandma Grace," said little Grace, looking at the statue with childish curiosity, "Mommy said you used to take care of babies like us. The child's innocence brought smiles to everyone present. Sarah noticed that her daughter was growing up with a natural connection to the family history, without the fears and prejudices that had affected previous generations. After the official ceremony, the families spread out across the property for a large community picnic. Children played under the same tree where their parents or grandparents had taken their first steps decades ago. The circle of life continued, enriched by history and strengthened by community. Marcus took a quiet moment to thank Sarah for insisting on discovering the truth about his family, even when he was reluctant. "You were right from the start," said Marcus, watching their children play with other kids. "This discovery changed our lives for the much better." "It wasn't just a discovery," replied Sarah. "It was a reunion with our roots, with our purpose, and with the strength we carry within us." As the sun began to set on that special day, Sarah walked alone to the original cabin, now transformed into the beating heart of a national movement. She sat in the chair where she had read the first letter from Mrs. Grace and reflected on the incredible journey that had begun with a simple phone call from a lawyer. The cabin was quiet, but still filled with memories and positive energy. Sarah could almost feel the presence of all the women who had found refuge there over the years, each contributing to building a legacy of love and hope. Benjamin ran into the cabin, followed closely by Grace. The two snuggled into Sarah's lap, creating a moment of perfect family harmony in the place where it had all begun. "Mommy, tell the story of Grandma Grace," asked little Grace, as she did almost every night. Sarah began to tell the story that had become her family's most precious treasure, the narrative of a woman who turned rejection into acceptance, loneliness into community, and difficulties into opportunities for a better future. As night fell over the property, other lights came on in the houses that sheltered families in transition, women building new futures, children growing up in an environment of love and support. The cabin that had once been a lonely refuge was now the center of a vibrant community. Sarah understood that she had not only inherited a property, but also a mission. The work begun by Mrs. Grace would continue through her children, and through all the people touched by that story of love, courage, and hope. The great century-old tree swayed gently in the night breeze, its leaves whispering ancient secrets and future promises. Under its protective shade, generations of stories intertwined, creating a rich tapestry of human experiences that honored the past while building the future. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you are watching from. If you have any similar experience or something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Sarah made the right decisions in honoring the memory of her great-grandmother? We would love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.